시작된 사랑 Lord lead us under grace In the quiet room I prayed your name You answered me with love Not faith 숨겨진 길에도 주의 손계시네 Not me
The morning Ivy Anna James was supposed to become a wife began like the fulfillment of every prayer she had whispered into the dark. The sun rose over Atlanta in soft gold, painting the skyline with the kind of light that made the world look as if it had been freshly forgiven. Inside the bridal suite of the Biltmore ballrooms, women moved with the sacred urgency that only surrounds weddings and births. Steam curled from mugs of coffee. Perfume lingered in the air. The low sound of gospel music floated from a Bluetooth speaker in the corner. And in the center of it all stood Ivy Anna James. At 42, Ivy was the kind of woman people remembered long after she left a room. Her skin was the color of polished mahogany, luminous beneath the morning light. Her features were elegant and strong, her dark eyes intelligent and steady. She was not a woman who had drifted through life waiting to be rescued. She had built her own consulting firm from nothing. She had helped her widowed mother keep their family home. She had survived disappointments that would have turned softer people cynical, and after years of praying, hoping, and refusing to settle, she believed she had finally found her person. Today, she was marrying Daniel Carter. Her mother adjusted the veil with trembling fingers. "You look like a prayer God decided to answer," she whispered. Ivy smiled, though emotion tightened her throat. Daniel was handsome, charming, and ambitious. He had proposed beneath a shower of lights on the rooftop of an Atlanta hotel, promising her stability, partnership, and a future where she would never have to carry everything alone again. She had believed him. More importantly, she had trusted him. That trust was standing at the altar waiting for her. And in less than 1 hour, it would be shattered so completely that the sound of it would echo across 2 continents. The sanctuary was overflowing. Nearly 400 guests filled the pews. White roses lined the aisle. Crystal chandeliers glowed overhead. Family members dabbed their eyes. Friends leaned forward in anticipation. Daniel stood at the altar in a tailored black tuxedo, smiling with the practiced confidence of a man who looked entirely certain of his future. No one in the church knew that he had barely slept. No one knew that his phone, hidden in the groom's room, contained 12 unanswered messages. No one knew that somewhere over the Pacific Ocean, a man was crossing the world with documents that could destroy him. 12 hours earlier, in Seoul, Jae-min Kim stood in the executive boardroom of Kim Global Holdings. At 42, Jae-min was a legend in the corporate world. Tall, broad-shouldered, and immaculately composed, he possessed the kind of presence that made rooms quiet without raising his voice. His face was sharply Korean, his dark eyes cool and precise, revealing little and missing nothing. Employees called him many things: the ghost of Seoul, the man who never lost, the CEO who could smell lies. He ignored all of it, because unlike most powerful men, Jae-min did not enjoy destruction. He simply refused to tolerate deception. His chief legal officer placed a folder on the conference table. We traced the final shell company. J. Min opened the documents. The signatures were unmistakable. The collateral agreement, the falsified guarantees, the stolen funds. And at the center of it all was one name, I-Fi Anna James. J. Min studied the page in silence. She authorized this? No, the attorney said. Her signature was copied. Her identity was used without consent. And Daniel Carter? He is getting married in Atlanta in 14 hours. J. Min looked up. For the first time that evening, emotion flickered behind his calm expression. Then he intends to bind her legally before the fraud is exposed. The room fell silent. One of the attorneys asked cautiously, should we notify authorities after the wedding? J. Min closed the file. No. His voice was quiet, deadly. If this woman is innocent, she walks into financial ruin the moment she says, I do. He rose to his feet. Prepare the documents. Sir? J. Min buttoned his jacket. We're going to Atlanta. The organ began. Guests stood. The sanctuary doors opened. I-Fi stepped into the aisle on her mother's arm. A collective breath swept through the church. She was breathtaking. Daniel's smile widened. For a moment, everything felt exactly as she had imagined. Every late-night prayer, every tear, every lonely year, every hope. She walked toward the altar, believing she was stepping into the safest chapter of her life. She was 3 steps away from Daniel when the rear doors of the church opened with a sound so sharp it seemed to split the moment in two. Heads turned. The organ faltered. Conversation rippled across the sanctuary. A tall Korean man in a dark tailored suit entered with 3 attorneys and 2 security personnel. He did not hurry. He did not apologize. He moved with the calm certainty of a man who had already calculated the cost of what he was about to do. Daniel's face lost all color. I-Fi saw it instantly. And in that single terrible second, she understood something was horribly wrong. J. Min stopped halfway down the aisle. His voice was low, controlled, and impossibly clear. Forgive the interruption. He looked directly at Daniel. This wedding cannot proceed. Gasps exploded through the church. I-Fi's bouquet trembled in her hands. Daniel forced a brittle laugh. This is absurd. J. Min's expression did not change. My name is J. Min Kim, CEO of Kim Global Holdings. He nodded to his legal counsel. Folders were distributed to Daniel, the efficient, and I-Fi. The papers shook in her hands. She scanned the first page, then the second, then the forged signature. Her signature, attached to a multi-million-dollar guarantee. Her name, her company, her future, used as collateral for a fraud she had never seen. The sanctuary blurred. She lifted her eyes slowly to Daniel. What is this? Daniel stepped forward, panic breaking through his charm. Baby, I can explain. But his voice had changed, and I-Fi heard the truth before he spoke another word. The man she loved was afraid, not of losing her, of being caught. Tears burned behind her eyes. You used my name. It was temporary. Temporary? I was going to fix it after the merger. The church erupted in whispers. I-Fi stared at him as if she had never seen him before. Years of trust collapsed inside her all at once. The proposal, the promises, the future she had built in her mind. All of it turned to dust at the altar. Humiliation hit first, then rage, then a grief so profound it felt physical. She turned toward J. Min, her eyes blazing. Did you know? He met her gaze with devastating steadiness. I knew enough to stop this before it became irreversible. Why? His answer was immediate. Because you appear to be the only innocent person in this church. The words landed like thunder. I-Fi's hands shook. Her veil suddenly felt heavy. Her wedding dress felt like a costume designed for a life that no longer existed. Daniel reached for her. I-Fi, please. She stepped back, and for the first time in years, Daniel Carter looked truly powerless. Ifi looked from the forged documents to the man she had trusted with her heart, then to the stranger who had crossed an ocean to prevent her destruction. Her world tilted. Nothing was what she thought it was, and the most terrifying part was that the stranger standing in the aisle seemed more trustworthy than the man waiting at the altar. Jae-min took one measured step closer. His voice dropped so only she could hear him. "If you marry him today?" He held her gaze. "You may lose everything by tomorrow morning." Ify tightened her grip on the bouquet until white petals began to fall to the floor like pieces of a future breaking part. And for the first time in her life, she did not know whether the man before her had just destroyed her wedding or saved her life. For 3 long seconds after Jae-min Kim spoke, no one in the church moved. The sanctuary remained frozen in a kind of sacred shock. White roses still perfumed the air. Crystal chandeliers continued to glitter above hundreds of stunned guests. The organist sat motionless, her fingers hovering over the keys as if even music no longer knew what to do. And in the center of the aisle, dressed in ivory silk and hand-sewn lace, Ify Anna James stood between two futures. One was the life she had spent years building in her imagination. The other was a terrifying unknown, represented by a Korean billionaire she had never met until 10 minutes ago. The first future had just collapsed at her feet. The second was staring at her with dark, unreadable eyes. Ify's heart was pounding so violently she could hear it over the whisper spreading through the sanctuary. Her fingers tightened around the folder Jae-min's legal team had placed in her hands. Inside were contracts, transfer authorizations, collateral agreements, wire records. Her name appeared over and over again. Her company, her tax identification number, her forged signature. Every page was a piece of evidence proving that the man waiting at the altar had quietly built a trap around her while promising to love her forever. For a moment, the world tilted. A lesser woman might have collapsed. A softer woman might have screamed. A more fragile woman might have begged for someone to tell her it was all a mistake. But Ify Anna James had not spent 42 years surviving disappointment to disintegrate in front of an audience. Pain was familiar to her. Humiliation was not new. What was new was that she had never been betrayed this thoroughly by someone she intended to call husband. She inhaled once, slowly, deliberately. Then she did something no one in the church expected. She lifted both hands to her head and removed her veil. The long ivory tool slipped from her hair and fell into her hands like the final surrender of a dream. A collective gasp moved through the sanctuary. Her mother covered her mouth. Daniel's expression changed from panic to dread because he understood exactly what the gesture meant. Ify was no longer a bride. She was a woman demanding the truth. She stepped forward until she stood directly in front of Daniel Carter. Only inches separated them. But emotionally, they were already worlds apart. Her voice, when she spoke, was frighteningly calm. "Look me in the eyes and tell me the truth." Daniel swallowed. "Baby, this is being blown out of proportion." The old pet name hit her ears like an insult. "Did you use my name? It wasn't what it looks like." "Did you forge my signature?" Daniel glanced toward the guests, toward the attorneys, toward Jae-min, anywhere but her face. And in that single cowardly movement, Ify received all the answers she needed. Still, she asked one final time, "Daniel?" Her voice broke slightly, not from weakness, but from the unbearable weight of the question. "Did you intend to marry me today while knowing that my business, my savings, and my reputation were tied to a fraud?" Daniel's jaw tightened. It was temporary. The words landed harder than any confession, because they were not an apology. They were a justification. Ify felt something inside her go cold, not shattered, not broken. Cold. The kind of cold that arrives when love dies and truth takes its place. Daniel reached for her hand. Ivy, please listen to me. I did this for us. She stared at him. For us. 3 words, used by weak men to hide selfishness. He had not risked his own future. He had gambled with hers, her company, her credit, her name, her mother's home, which Ivy had pledged as collateral for a legitimate expansion loan. Everything she had worked for, everything she had protected. Daniel had laid it on the table like chips in a casino, and today he had expected her to smile while handing him legal access to the rest. Tears filled her eyes, but her spine remained straight. I was going to become your wife. Daniel's voice cracked. And you still can. The audacity of the statement nearly took her breath away, as if vows were still possible, as if trust were a switch that could be turned back on, as if she had not just discovered that the man she loved considered her signature more valuable than her heart. Ify stepped backward, once, twice. Then she turned toward the guests. Rows of faces watched her with pity, horror, and unbearable curiosity. For the first time, she understood that this moment would be discussed in family circles, church groups, and social media posts for years. But strangely, the humiliation no longer mattered, because something far more important had happened. She had seen the truth before it was too late. She placed her bouquet on the altar, white roses against polished wood, a silent funeral for the life she thought she was about to begin. A few women in the audience began to cry. Daniel's face crumpled. Ify, don't do this! She turned to him one last time. Her voice was quiet, steady, and absolutely final. You were supposed to protect me. The words struck harder than any scream could have. Then she walked away. No music played. No one moved. The bride who had entered the church surrounded by hope now walked back down the aisle alone. Each step echoed like a judgment. Her dress flowed behind her like a river of white surrender. Her mother moved to follow, but Ify gently shook her head. Not yet. She needed to survive the first few minutes of this new reality by herself. As she neared the church doors, Jae-min Kim stepped aside to let her pass. For the first time, he spoke directly to her as something other than a witness. Ms. James. She stopped, not because she trusted him, but because she was too emotionally exhausted to pretend he did not exist. His voice was low and composed. My legal team can secure your accounts, your company records, and any remaining assets before additional transfers occur. The offer was practical, precise, protective, and in any other circumstance, she might have accepted immediately. But Ify's world had been destroyed by a man who claimed to love her. The last thing she could do was place herself under the protection of another stranger, no matter how honorable he appeared. She turned to him, eyes shining with unshed tears. You may have saved me today. Her voice trembled slightly, but I do not know you. Jae-min held her gaze. No offense, no pressure, only understanding. She continued, and right now, I need one thing no billionaire on earth can give me. What is that? A reason to believe I can trust anyone again. For the first time, something shifted in Jae-min's expression. Not weakness, not pity, something deeper, respect. He inclined his head. Then I hope you find it. Ify turned and walked out into the bright Atlanta afternoon alone. The wedding guests would spend the next several hours arguing over who was to blame. Some condemned Daniel. Some questioned Jae-min's timing. Some pitied Ify. But none of them understood the full truth. The most dangerous part of betrayal is not the public humiliation. It is the private silence that follows. The moment when the crowd disappears and a woman is left alone with the wreckage of everything she believed. That night, shortly after midnight, Ify sat in her penthouse apartment overlooking the lights of Atlanta. The wedding dress hung across a chair like the ghost of another woman's life. Mascara stains marked the silk bodice. Her engagement ring lay on the coffee table where she had dropped it after returning home. She had ignored more than 200 messages. Friends, family, reporters, Daniel, mostly Daniel. She opened her laptop to review her business accounts, hoping work might give her something solid to hold on to. At first, everything looked normal. Then she saw it. One account, her company's operating reserve, the account she had spent 7 years building. Available balance, $43.17. For several seconds, she could not breathe. She clicked frantically through the transaction history. Wire transfers, authorized that morning. Destination accounts she did not recognize. Total withdrawals, $487,000. Her blood ran cold. Daniel had not merely lied to her. He had not merely used her name. He had taken her money. On their wedding day, by sunrise, Ivy Anna James had cried enough tears to understand something terrifying. The wedding had not been the disaster. The wedding had been the warning. The real disaster had begun quietly, months earlier, in boardrooms and bank accounts and private conversations she had never heard. And now it was sitting in the balance sheet of her company. 7 years of work, 7 years of sacrifice, 7 years of choosing discipline over comfort. Reduced overnight to $43.17. $43.17. The number repeated in her mind like a cruel joke. It was less than the price of the bridal bouquet she had left at the altar. Less than the manicure she had paid for 2 days earlier. Less than the tip she usually left when someone carried her luggage. Her fiancé had almost turned her into a legal wife and a financial corpse on the same day. And the only person who seemed to understand the full extent of what was happening was a Korean billionaire she had met under the worst circumstances imaginable. That realization did not make her grateful. It made her furious. The black town car arrived at Kim Global Holdings' Atlanta office just after 8 in the morning. The building rose above downtown Atlanta like a blade of mirrored glass, sharp and cold against the sky. Ivy stepped out wearing dark jeans, a cream blouse, and the same navy blazer she wore when she needed to remind herself who she was. She had slept less than 2 hours. Her eyes were swollen. Her posture was not. The receptionist recognized her immediately. "Ms. James, Mr. Kim is expecting—" Ivy did not slow down. "Good." The elevator doors closed behind her with the finality of a courtroom door. By the time she reached the executive floor, anger had become the only thing keeping her upright. Not because she believed Jae-min Kim was guilty, but because he had entered her life like a storm, shattered everything she believed, and then vanished into calm while she spent the night counting what Daniel had stolen. She needed answers, and she needed them now. The executive suite was quiet enough to hear her heels strike the marble floor. 2 attorneys looked up as she crossed the reception area. Secretary Kim, impeccably dressed and utterly unflappable, rose from her desk. "Ms. James." The office doors opened before she could finish. Jae-min stood in the doorway. No tie, white shirt, dark trousers, his jacket draped over one arm. He looked as if he had been awake all night and had somehow emerged more composed than ordinary men looked after a full week of rest. His expression did not show surprise, only recognition. "I was wondering how long it would take." The calm in his voice nearly pushed her over the edge. Ivy strode into his office. The doors closed behind them, and she finally let the anger speak. "You ruined my wedding!" Her voice cracked like thunder in the quiet room. "My fiancé stole nearly $500,000 from me." She stepped closer. "My family thinks my life is a spectacle." Another step. "And the only reason I know any of this is because you walked into a church and detonated my future in front of 400 people. Jae-min listened without interrupting. No defensiveness, no apology, no attempt to soften her pain with carefully chosen words. When she finished, the silence between them felt electrically charged. He set his jacket aside, then spoke with the same precise calm he had carried into the church. "Sit down." Ivy stared at him. "Excuse me? If you still believe I ruined your life, you're free to leave." He crossed to a side conference table where several thick binders were arranged in perfect order. But if you want to understand how close you came to losing far more than your wedding, sit down. His tone contained no arrogance, only certainty. And certainty, she was discovering, was far more unsettling than charm. Slowly, Ivy sat. Min opened the first binder. This began 9 months ago. He slid a timeline toward her. Corporate entities, transfer routes, international shell companies, loan guarantees. Her eyes narrowed. Daniel's name appeared repeatedly. So did hers. He opened a second binder. Audio surveillance, authorized by our internal investigation. He pressed a button. Daniel's voice filled the room. Smooth, confident, unmistakable. Once the marriage certificate is filed, I'll have access to everything. Her consulting firm, her collateral accounts, and her personal guarantees. Ivy's body went rigid. Another voice asked, "And what about her?" Daniel laughed, a short, dismissive sound that felt more violent than shouting. "She thinks we're building a future." Iffy's breath caught. Min pressed play again. By the time she realizes what happened, the merger will be complete, and I'll be untouchable. The words struck her like physical blows, not because they were shocking, but because they were spoken so casually, as if her love were merely a line item, as if trust were a business strategy, as if she were not a woman, but a vehicle. Min opened a third binder. Proposed merger agreement. He turned to the highlighted section. The acquisition structure would transfer funds through a Singapore holding company and dissolve the domestic entity within 72 hours of closing. Daniel would receive an offshore payout, then disappear. No company to sue, no accessible assets, no practical recovery path. And because her name had been attached to the guarantees, creditors would pursue her first. Ivy stared at the numbers. The scale of the betrayal was almost too large to absorb. This would have destroyed me. Min met her eyes. Yes. My business. Yes. My credit. Yes. My mother's house. His answer came after the briefest pause. Yes. The single word broke something inside her. Not because she had not already suspected it, but because hearing it aloud transformed fear into fact. Her mother's home. The place her late father had worked 2 jobs to keep. The place where every Christmas, every birthday, every answered prayer had been celebrated. Daniel had been willing to put that house at risk while standing before God and promising to cherish her. Ivy lowered her head and wept. Not elegantly, not quietly, but with the deep, involuntary grief of a woman who had just discovered that the man she loved had been measuring her worth in transferable assets. For several minutes, Min said nothing. He did not move around the table. He did not offer a rehearsed comfort. He simply remained there, steady, present, allowing her pain the dignity of space. When her tears subsided, she lifted red-rimmed eyes to him. "Why did you come yourself?" It was the question she had been avoiding. Why cross an ocean for a woman he did not know? Why risk public spectacle? Why intervene personally? Min folded his hands. His answer was simple. "I did not come because I was interested in you." The bluntness would have stung if she were in any state to care. He continued, "I came because every fraud has a final victim." He held her gaze. "You were his." The words settled over the room with devastating clarity. No grand romance, no secret obsession, no cinematic fantasy. He had not come to claim her. He had come because he could not watch an innocent woman walk willingly into a professionally engineered collapse. For reasons Ivy could not fully explain, that truth moved her more deeply than any declaration of attraction would have, because it meant he had acted without expecting anything in return. A soft knock interrupted them. Secretary Kim entered, carrying a tablet. Her normally impassive face was unusually tense. "Chairman." She handed the device to Min. This was uploaded 10 minutes ago. Jae Min's expression hardened as he read. He turned the screen toward Ify. A video thumbnail filled the display. Her face, Jae Min's face. The title in bold letters, Bride Exposed. Ify Anna James cheated with Korean billionaire before wedding. Her blood turned to ice. The footage was fabricated from manipulated clips taken in the church and edited to suggest a secret affair. Millions would believe it before noon. Her humiliation, which had been private and painful, was now becoming public and strategic. Daniel was not apologizing. He was retaliating. Ify looked up, her voice barely above a whisper. He's trying to destroy me. Jae Min's dark eyes sharpened into something far colder than anger. For the first time since she met him, Ify saw not merely a disciplined executive, but a man who had just decided that someone had crossed a line. He set the tablet down. His voice was quiet, controlled, and infinitely more dangerous than shouting. No! He stepped toward the window, looking out over Atlanta as if calculating the dismantling of an empire. Then he turned back to her. He just made the worst decision of his life. By noon, Ify Anna James had learned a brutal truth about modern humiliation. It was no longer enough for your heart to be broken in private. Now the world demanded that your suffering trend. The video Daniel Carter released at dawn spread through social media with the efficiency of a wildfire, fed by gossip, envy, and the internet's insatiable appetite for a woman's public collapse. The thumbnail alone was engineered to wound. Her face, Jae Min Kim's face. The words in bold, Bride Exposed. If Anna James cheated with Korean billionaire before wedding. The footage was expertly manipulated. A slowed clip of Jae Min stepping close to her in the church. A cropped frame of her looking at him with tears in her eyes. Dramatic music, speculative captions, anonymous sources. And the oldest lie in the world, dressed in new technology. If a woman is betrayed, perhaps she must have deserved it. The internet did what it always does. It chose entertainment over truth. Comment sections filled with venom. She was probably seeing him the whole time. Poor Daniel. Women always monkey branch to richer men. So she upgraded from fiancé to billionaire. Others were worse, crueler, racially charged. Some could not tolerate the sight of a successful Black woman being protected by a powerful Korean man. Some were angry because they secretly wanted the story to be true, and some simply enjoyed watching dignity become spectacle. By afternoon, Ify's name was trending, not as a respected entrepreneur, not as a woman nearly defrauded, but as a scandal. The fallout hit her family almost immediately. Her aunt called to ask whether the affair rumors were true. A church elder left a carefully worded voicemail about maintaining a testimony. A cousin texted, "Girl, please tell me you did not leave one man for a billionaire in the middle of the ceremony." Her mother, Grace James, said very little, which frightened Ify more than anger ever could. Grace was a woman of wisdom, faith, and measured speech. When she became quiet, it meant her heart was working through something too painful for immediate words. Ify hated that her mother had to endure public embarrassment because she had trusted the wrong man. That shame burned deeper than the wedding itself. At precisely 2 p.m., Kim Global Holdings issued an official statement. The financial press, legal reporters, and gossip accounts picked it up within minutes. The statement was brief, clinical, and devastating in its precision. Chairman Jae Min Kim has no personal or romantic relationship with Ms. Ify Anna James. Mr. Kim intervened solely to prevent an innocent third party from becoming financially liable for a fraudulent transaction currently under investigation. No sensational language, no emotional embellishment, no hint of defensiveness, just facts. The kind of facts that quietly crush lies. But the statement contained something more powerful than denial. It made clear that Jae Min was willing to attach his name, company, and legal resources to the public assertion that Ify was a victim, not a co-conspirator. He was not protecting a lover. He was protecting the truth. And he was doing so at considerable risk to himself. Ify read the statement in the conference room of Kim Global Holdings' Atlanta office. Her attorney sat across from her. The crisis communications team spoke in measured terms about injunctions, defamation notices, and emergency account freezes. Yet all she could focus on was the uncomfortable fact that her life now rested inside a system built by a man she barely knew. It offended her pride. She had always been the one who solved her own problems, the one who protected others, the one who paid her own bills and carried her own burdens. Now, because of Daniel's betrayal, she needed help. And the help came wrapped in a 6'2" Korean billionaire with unnerving calm and eyes that seemed to notice everything. She hated that. She hated how safe his competence made her feel. And she hated that she trusted his actions more than she trusted her own judgment. By evening, the practical realities became unavoidable. Daniel had already moved funds. He had access to documents. He was actively manipulating public opinion. Ify's attorney looked at her over a stack of filings. You need temporary legal protection, cybersecurity monitoring, and immediate financial containment. The translation was simple. She needed Jae-min. Ify closed her eyes briefly. Every independent instinct in her resisted. But independence was not the same as stubbornness, and wisdom sometimes meant accepting a shield when one was offered in good faith. When she opened her eyes, her voice was quiet. Fine. One word, reluctant, heavy, necessary. I'll accept the temporary protection. No one celebrated. Jae-min, standing near the window, simply inclined his head as if she had made the most rational decision in the world, which, infuriatingly, she had. That night, Ify remained in a secured executive suite prepared by Kim Global's legal team. The city lights of Atlanta shimmered beyond the glass. Her mind was exhausted, but sleep refused to come. Near midnight, she stepped into the hallway to clear her thoughts. As she passed a partially open conference room door, she heard voices. She stopped, not intentionally, but because one of the voices was Jae-min's. Inside, Daniel Carter's attorney was speaking through a speakerphone. This is a private matter between two former fiancés. Chairman Kim should distance himself before his involvement damages his company. Silence followed. Then Jae-min spoke. His tone was calm enough to be mistaken for indifference. It was not indifference. It was controlled steel. Your client forged documents, stole funds, and attempted to transfer financial liability to a woman he intended to marry. A pause, then even quieter. Ms. James will not stand alone while he does it. Ify felt something shift inside her. The words were not performative. He did not know she was listening. There were no cameras, no board members, no strategic audience. Only a man speaking into the night with the unembellished certainty that he intended to protect her whether she trusted him yet or not. The realization unsettled her more than flirtation ever could, because attraction can be manufactured, character cannot. She stepped away before he saw her. Back in her room, she sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the city. For the first time since the wedding, her thoughts of Jae-min changed. Until now, he had been a disruption, a force, a necessary complication. But tonight she had glimpsed something rarer. A man who did not posture, a man who did not seek gratitude, a man who seemed to consider integrity more important than convenience. And for a woman whose trust had just been shattered, that was dangerously compelling. The following evening, Ify returned to her mother's house. Grace James prepared tea the way she always did when life required truth rather than comfort. The two women sat at the kitchen table where decades of family decisions had been made. Grace studied her daughter carefully. You look tired. I am. You also look less afraid. Ify hesitated. She thought of Jae-min standing at the church doors, of his emotionless precision, of the documents, of the statement, of the words she overheard in the conference room. Ms. James will not stand alone while he does it. Grace lifted her teacup, then asked the question with the gentle directness only a mother possesses. Are you sure that man only came to save you? Effie froze. The steam from her tea rose between them like a quiet prophecy, and for the first time, she realized the answer might be far more complicated than either of them was prepared to admit. 3 days after her wedding became international gossip, Ify Anna James found herself standing in front of the floor-to-ceiling windows of Kim Global Holdings' Atlanta office, watching rain streak down the glass like lines of unfinished grief. The city below looked blurred and uncertain, which was fitting, because her life still felt like something viewed through water. Daniel Carter had vanished from public view. His attorneys were stalling. The stolen funds had been traced through shell companies spanning 3 countries. And every new discovery revealed a harder truth. Daniel had not been improvising. He had been executing a plan, a carefully constructed financial ambush that reached far beyond Atlanta, beyond her, beyond even him. And the center of that web was thousands of miles away in Seoul. Jae-min Kim entered the conference room carrying a single black folder. As always, Jae-min Kim looked impossibly composed. Charcoal suit, white shirt, no wasted movement, the kind of man who seemed to bring order into every room he entered. Effie had begun to notice that he never rushed, never fidgeted, and never raised his voice. He simply arranged reality until chaos had nowhere left to hide. He placed the folder before her. The final approvals were routed through Seoul. Effie opened it. Organizational charts, transaction logs, internal authorizations, the names of executives and holding companies she did not recognize. Her stomach tightened. This is bigger than Daniel. Yes. How much bigger? Jae-min met her eyes. Large enough that if we stop at the American filings, your name may remain associated with the fraud indefinitely. The sentence landed with devastating clarity. Innocence was not enough. She needed proof. And proof lived in Korea. Jae-min folded his hands. I need to return to Seoul tonight. A slight pause. I believe you should come with me. The invitation hung in the air like a challenge. Effie stared at him. Traveling across the world with a man she had known less than a week should have sounded absurd. Dangerous, even. Yet almost nothing about the previous 7 days had resembled normal life. She thought of the comments online, the ruined wedding, the stolen money, the forged signatures, the lingering possibility that her reputation, company, and future could remain permanently stained if the truth was not fully documented. Her first instinct was to refuse, not because she doubted Jae-min, but because accepting would mean stepping even deeper into his world. And that world was beginning to exert a gravitational pull she did not entirely trust. Why me? She asked quietly. Jae-min answered without hesitation. Because this case concerns your name, your company, and your future. A brief pause. And because I believe you should see the truth for yourself. No charm, no pressure, only the relentless logic that seemed to govern every decision he made. Ify closed the folder. Her voice was firm. I'm not going to Seoul for you. Something almost imperceptible shifted in his expression, the faintest suggestion of approval. I would be disappointed if you were. 20 hours later, Ify stepped out of the aircraft at Incheon International Airport. The cool Korean air struck her face like a reset. Beyond the glass walls of the terminal stretched a world she had seen only in dramas, documentaries, and late-night dreams. Efficient, elegant, vast. Everything moved with disciplined purpose, and at the center of it stood the man whose life seemed built from the same principles. The motorcade waiting outside was understated by billionaire standards, which somehow made it more intimidating. Black sedans, security personnel, drivers who bowed, no unnecessary display, only quiet authority. As they entered the expressway towards Seoul, neon lights began to rise against the evening sky. Ify watched the city unfold. Bridges over the Han River, towering glass buildings, ancient mountains holding the horizon. The energy was electric, alive, and yet, beside her, Jae Min sat in perfect stillness, reviewing documents under the soft cabin light. The contrast was striking. The city pulsed with motion. The man who ruled a large part of it seemed carved from restraint. The headquarters of Kim Global Holdings occupied the upper floors of one of Seoul's most powerful buildings. The private residence connected to the tower was less a home than a statement of disciplined luxury. Warm wood, stone, art chosen with deliberate restraint. Panoramic views of the Han River. Everything was beautiful. Everything was immaculate. Everything was quiet. Too quiet. As Ify was shown to her suite, she became aware of an unsettling truth. There was no sign of laughter, no evidence of ordinary mess, no photographs casually left on tables, no life spilling beyond the boundaries of control. The place was magnificent and deeply lonely. Later that evening, she stood alone on the terrace overlooking the river. The city glittered below like a field of stars. Jae Min joined her without announcement. For several moments, neither spoke. Finally, Ify said what she had been thinking. This place is extraordinary. Jae Min nodded. It is efficient. The answer was so characteristic that she almost smiled. Then she turned toward him. And lonely. For the first time, his silence felt like an admission. The following night, she met his family. The dinner took place at the Kim estate in the hills above Seoul, a property where tradition and power sat at the same table. The architecture was breathtaking. The atmosphere was not. The moment Ify entered, she understood that she was not being welcomed. She was being assessed, measured, classified. Jae Min's younger brother, Min-ho Kim, watched her with unreadable eyes. His sister offered polite conversation sharpened by subtle condescension. But the center of the room was Jae Min's mother, Madam Kim, elegant, impeccably dressed. Her posture so perfect it felt hereditary. Her smile never reached her eyes. Throughout dinner, questions arrived disguised as courtesy. How long have you known my son? Your business is quite small compared to ours, yes? America encourages unusual relationships. Each sentence was crafted to sound civilized while drawing blood. Ify answered every question with grace and unflinching intelligence. And with every measured response, Jae Min's respect for her deepened. She could feel it, not in words, in attention, in the way his eyes lingered when she refused to shrink, in the way he quietly redirected conversations when they became cruel, in the way his presence seemed to say, without speaking, stand. I am here. After dinner, Ify stepped onto a moonlit terrace to steady herself. The night air was cool and fragrant. The city shimmered in the distance. A few moments later, Madam Kim joined her. For several seconds, the older woman admired the view. Then she spoke. Beauty can be deceiving. Ify remained silent. Madam Kim turned to face her fully. My son is not a man who acts impulsively. No, Ify said evenly. He is not. The older woman's eyes sharpened, which means your presence here is either a strategic necessity or a complication. Ify held her gaze. I came to clear my name. Madam Kim's smile was exquisite and merciless. My son may enjoy rescuing damaged situations. A pause, but families like ours do not absorb scandals. They erase them. The words settled in the night like falling ice. Then came the sentence that changed the emotional temperature of the story entirely. Madam Kim stepped closer. Her voice dropped to a whisper polished by generations of power. Women like you do not survive in families like ours. The terrace seemed to go still. Ify's spine straightened. The hurt was real, but so was the fire rising beneath it. For the second time in less than a week, someone had mistaken her vulnerability for weakness. And once again, They were about to learn how dangerous that assumption could be. Inside the house, unseen by either woman, Jae-min had just stepped into the corridor and heard every word. The morning after Madam Kim's warning, Ify Anna James woke in the guest suite overlooking the Han River with one sentence still echoing through her mind. Women like you do not survive in families like ours. The words should have intimidated her. They should have made her feel small, foreign, and painfully out of place. Instead, they awakened something far more dangerous. Resolve. Because Ify Anna James had not crossed an ocean to be measured by the prejudices of wealthy strangers. She had come to reclaim her name. And if the Kim family believed she was merely a scandal in a designer dress, they were about to discover the same thing Daniel Carter had learned too late. The quiet woman in the room was often the one most capable of dismantling it. By 7:30 that morning, Ify was already seated in the executive war room on the 68th floor of Kim Global Holdings. Floor-to-ceiling windows framed the sprawling brilliance of Seoul. Screens glowed with transaction histories. Printed ledgers covered the conference table. Attorneys moved in and out carrying fresh reports, and at the center of the operation sat Ify, reading. Not passively, not emotionally, but with the fierce concentration of a woman rebuilding the architecture of her own life. For years, clients had underestimated her because she was composed, because she listened more than she spoke, because she did not confuse volume with intelligence. Daniel had made the same mistake, and now, so had the Kim family. At first, the financial records appeared overwhelming. Shell corporations in Singapore, holding companies in Hong Kong, authorization chains routed through Seoul and Atlanta. But numbers had a language, and Ify was fluent in patterns. By late morning, she stopped highlighting names and began studying timing, approval timestamps, transfer windows, currency conversions, repeated authorization codes. Something was wrong. One of the intermediary accounts had approved 2 transfers exactly 7 minutes apart, one requiring executive clearance, the other requiring departmental sign-off. The sequence was impossible under normal protocol. She leaned closer. The second transfer used an internal override code. Someone inside Kim Global had manually opened a door Daniel should never have been able to access. Her pulse quickened. Daniel had not infiltrated the system alone. He had been invited in. Across the room, Jae-min Kim was reviewing testimony with outside counsel. He noticed the change in her posture immediately. The way her shoulders squared, the way her eyes sharpened, the way she forgot the room existed. He had seen that expression before, not in socialites or opportunists, in the best analysts he had ever employed, the moment when intelligence locked onto truth and refused to release it. He excused himself from the attorneys and approached quietly. What did you find? Ify did not look up. This transfer sequence should be impossible. She pointed to the timestamps. Jae-min studied the data. For the first time in several days, genuine surprise crossed his face. His attorneys had reviewed these files repeatedly. None had noticed the anomaly. Ify continued. Daniel wasn't clever enough to create this structure by himself. Her finger moved across the page. He had internal assistants. Jae-min's eyes lifted to hers. A long silence passed between them. Not awkward, charged. The kind of silence that occurs when one formidable mind recognizes another. Finally, he spoke. You were right to come. It was not a compliment delivered lightly. From Jae-min Kim, those 5 words carried the weight of profound respect. And unexpectedly, they mattered to her. More than they should have. The investigation intensified. Days blurred into nights. Meals were forgotten. Coffee accumulated. The war room became less like an office and more like a battlefield constructed from spreadsheets and legal strategy. And somewhere in the exhaustion, the emotional distance between them began to change. Not dramatically, not with sudden declarations, but through the subtle intimacy of sustained work. The way Jae-min instinctively set a fresh cup of tea beside her when hers grew cold. The way Ify anticipated his questions before he voiced them. The way both of them reached for the same document at the same moment and paused, fingers nearly touching. The way their eyes met across a table covered in evidence and held half a second longer than necessary. Neither mentioned it. Both felt it. And because neither was careless, the unspoken attraction became more powerful with each restrained moment. One evening, near 2 in the morning, the executive floor had emptied. Rain tapped softly against the glass. The city glittered beneath them like a circuit board stretching to the horizon. Ify leaned back, rubbing tired eyes. I should warn you. Jae-min looked up from his laptop. About what? She folded her arms and regarded him steadily. I am not interested in becoming another man's rescue project. The words hung in the quiet room, honest, unadorned, and rooted in pain she had not yet fully processed. Jae-min closed his computer. His expression remained calm, but his answer came with unusual directness. I did not bring you to Seoul to rescue you. A slight pause. I brought you because you are capable. The simplicity of the statement struck her harder than flirtation ever could. He did not praise her beauty. He did not offer protective cliches. He named her competence. He saw her as an equal, which, after Daniel, felt almost unbearably intimate. Still, Ify held his gaze. And if this becomes personal? Jae-min's dark eyes remained steady. Then it will happen with your full consent. No games, no pressure, no ambiguity. For several seconds, neither spoke. The air between them felt charged enough to ignite. Ify was suddenly aware of how close he stood, of the quiet intensity in his face, of the dangerous comfort she was beginning to associate with his presence. She looked away first, not because she felt nothing, but because she felt far too much. At 3:14 a.m., while reviewing a newly decrypted set of overseas transactions, Ify noticed a familiar internal authorization code. She froze. Her breath slowed. She opened the link transfer, then another, and another. The routing trail ended at a private investment vehicle registered under a family office subsidiary. The beneficial signatory field had been partially masked, but not well enough. She enlarged the document, read the name once, then again. Her stomach dropped. The office suddenly felt colder. Jae-min noticed the change in her expression immediately. He crossed the room. What is it? Ify turned the screen toward him. Her voice was barely above a whisper. The words were so shocking that even saying them felt dangerous. I found the hidden transfer. Jae-min's eyes moved to the signature line. For the first time since she had met him, the legendary composure of Jae-min Kim cracked. Only slightly, but unmistakably, because the name on the document was not that of a distant executive, not an outside accomplice, not a disposable employee. It belonged to the one person whose involvement would turn this investigation into a war inside his own bloodline, Min-ho Kim. There are betrayals that wound, and there are betrayals that rearrange the internal architecture of a life. Ify Anna James understood the first kind intimately. She had lived through the destruction of a wedding, a reputation, and nearly everything she had built. But on the 68th floor of Kim Global Holdings in Seoul, as she watched Jae-min Kim stare at the name of his younger brother on the screen, she witnessed the second kind. The kind that does not merely break trust, the kind that fractures blood. For a long moment, the office was so silent that Ify could hear the faint hum of the ventilation system and the distant whisper of rain against the glass. On the monitor, the transfer record remained unchanged. Beneficial signatory, Min-ho Kim. The name seemed almost impossible in its simplicity. Not a rumor, not an inference, not a suspicion, a documented fact. Jae-min did not speak immediately. He stood perfectly still, one hand resting on the back of a chair, his dark eyes fixed on the evidence with a stillness so complete it bordered on frightening. To anyone who did not know him, he might have appeared unaffected, as calm as ever, as precise as ever, as untouchable as the man the business press called the ghost of Seoul. But Ify knew better now. She had learned that with Jae-min, emotion did not erupt outward. It compressed inward, under pressure, into silence. And that silence, she was beginning to understand, cost him more than most people would ever know. Finally, he spoke. Verify it. His voice was steady, too steady, the kind of steadiness that only exists when a man is holding his internal world together by force. Ify did not argue. She reopened the routing trail, cross-checked the masked identifiers, compared the digital signatures, ran the authorization against family office records. Every path led to the same destination. There was no error, no ambiguity, no merciful alternative. When she finished, she turned toward him. It's real. The words seemed to alter the air in the room. Jae-min closed his eyes briefly, not in denial, not in weakness, in recognition. Then he opened them again. And the expression on his face was so controlled, so disciplined, that it was somehow more heartbreaking than open grief would have been. Ify had met Minho briefly. She knew him only as the younger brother with unreadable eyes and a practiced half smile, the man who sat at family dinners with quiet confidence and said very little, the man who seemed perpetually positioned in Jae-min's shadow. But now, as the evidence assembled itself like a legal noose, she began to see the deeper tragedy. This was not merely corporate fraud, it was sibling treason. One brother had spent decades building an empire. The other had quietly sold access to its foundations. And the most devastating part was that Jae-min had likely spent years protecting him. At dawn, Jae-min summoned Minho to the executive boardroom. The room was vast, minimalist, and severe. Floor-to-ceiling windows revealed the city waking beneath a blanket of silver light. Senior counsel sat along one side of the table. Compliance officers stood ready. Ify remained near the far end, present but unobtrusive. Minho entered wearing a navy suit and an expression of polite annoyance. He looked first at the attorneys, then at the documents spread across the table, then at his brother. Whatever confidence he had carried into the room vanished. Jae-min spoke without raising his voice. Sit down. Minho obeyed, not because he wanted to, because he had never heard that tone and ignored it. The evidence was presented methodically. Transfer records, override codes, ownership structures, communication logs. Each document tightened the circle. Each explanation removed another avenue of denial. Minho attempted deflection, then indignation, then selective memory. But facts have a peculiar cruelty. They do not tire. They do not become emotional. They simply remain. At last, Minho leaned back in his chair, the last traces of pretense evaporating. The silence that followed was heavy enough to feel physical. Jae-min's question was almost unbearably quiet. Why? For the first time, real emotion flickered across Minho's face. Not remorse, resentment. You were always the son our father wanted. The confession entered the room like poison. Years of rivalry, comparison, and unspoken bitterness condensed into a single sentence. Minho's voice rose. You inherited responsibility, power, and respect. I inherited your leftovers. Jae-min did not interrupt. He simply listened, shoulders rigid, as the younger brother he had defended revealed how long he had mistaken envy for injustice. Ify watched Jae-min carefully. The world knew him as controlled, ruthless when necessary, almost impossible to read. But in that moment, she saw something much more vulnerable. Not a cold man. A man trained from childhood to endure pain without displaying it. A man who had learned that power often requires private suffering. A man whose first instinct, even now, was not to retaliate, but to understand. The realization struck her with surprising force. Daniel had weaponized intimacy. Jae-min, by contrast, seemed willing to absorb extraordinary hurt rather than betray what he loved. That difference was becoming increasingly difficult to ignore. The confrontation lasted another hour. By the end, Minho's position was untenable. His access was suspended. His accounts were frozen. Outside counsel began preparing criminal referrals. Yet the emotional devastation in the room far exceeded the legal consequences. When the attorneys finally departed, Jae-min remained seated at the head of the table, motionless. The city spread behind him like an empire suddenly made fragile. Ify approached quietly. For several moments, she said nothing. Then she placed a single cup of tea beside him. The same small act of care he had repeated for her during countless late-night sessions. Jae-min looked up. The gratitude in his eyes was subtle, but unmistakable. "You do not have to stay," he said. Ify's answer came softly. "I know." And that was precisely why she remained. They sat together in the boardroom as morning brightened over Seoul. No declarations, no dramatic embrace. Only two wounded people sharing a silence that no longer felt empty. After some time, Jae-min spoke. "I thought I understood the limits of betrayal." Ify turned toward him. "So did I." Their eyes met, and for the first time, the connection between them felt less like attraction and more like recognition. Each had seen the other at the precise intersection of power and heartbreak. Each understood the private cost of appearing strong. The intimacy of that understanding was deeper than either of them was prepared to name. By afternoon, word of Minho's exposure began leaking through financial circles. And with it came the first counterattack. A statement from Minho's legal team was sent to selected media outlets. The language was carefully chosen, defensive, strategic, and devastating. Among the claims was one sentence that froze the blood in Ify's veins. Mr. Minho Kim maintains that Chairman Jae-min Kim was aware of irregularities involving Daniel Carter well before the Atlanta wedding and chose to intervene only when the situation became personally advantageous. Ify read the statement twice, then slowly lifted her eyes to Jae-min. The accusation changed everything. If true, it would mean Jae-min had allowed her to approach the altar knowing she was in danger. It would transform him from protector into strategist, from rescuer into opportunist. And for the first time since she began to trust him, doubt entered the space between them. Power does not collapse when enemies attack from the outside. Power becomes truly vulnerable when doubt enters from within. By the next morning, Kim Global Holdings was no longer discussing Daniel Carter's fraud. The company was discussing Jae-min Kim. And in empires built on precision, there is no more dangerous moment than the instant the institution begins asking whether its own architect can still be trusted. The emergency board hearing was scheduled for 9 o'clock in the Executive Council chamber, the most intimidating room in the Seoul headquarters. The chamber occupied the top floor of the tower. Floor-to-ceiling glass overlooked the vast sweep of Seoul. A single black stone table stretched nearly the length of the room. Screens glowed along the walls. The atmosphere was less like a meeting and more like a private court where reputations were measured, weighed, and, when necessary, quietly executed. By 8:30, directors had arrived from Tokyo, Singapore, London, and New York. Independent counsel occupied one side of the room. Audit chairs reviewed briefing packets. And at the center of every whispered conversation was the same question. Had Jae-min Kim used an American bride's public humiliation to distract the board from corruption inside his own family? It was a devastating allegation, because if true, it would not merely suggest poor judgment. It would suggest orchestration, manipulation, a willingness to turn a vulnerable woman into a strategic shield. Ify Anna. James read the briefing materials alone in a private conference room one floor below. Each page tightened the knot in her chest. The board's concerns were logical. The optics were terrible. Jae-min's brother had been implicated. The scandal began at Ify's wedding, and Jae-min had crossed an ocean to intervene personally. To anyone lacking the full context, the narrative could be rewritten into something deeply sinister. The safest choice for Ify was obvious. Leave. Return to Atlanta. Distance herself from the Kim family and its internal war. protect what remained of her own reputation. No one would blame her. In fact, many would consider it wise. Her attorneys quietly encouraged exactly that. But wisdom and truth are not always identical. And Ify had lived long enough to know that abandoning someone at the moment they become vulnerable is one of the cruelest forms of self-preservation. Jae-min had walked into a church and stopped her from becoming collateral damage. Now his own credibility stood on the edge of destruction. And for the first time since Daniel's betrayal, Ify understood that loyalty is most meaningful when it is costly. At precisely 9 o'clock, Jae-min entered the council chamber. The room fell silent. He wore a dark charcoal suit and a silver tie. His posture was immaculate, his expression unreadable. But Ify, who had spent sleepless nights across conference tables from him, recognized the signs others missed: the slight rigidity in his shoulders, the careful stillness of his hands, the almost imperceptible tightening around his eyes. He was under extraordinary pressure, and, as always, he intended to carry it without complaint. The board chair began. Chairman Kim, serious questions have arisen regarding the timing and purpose of your intervention in Atlanta. The hearing proceeded with surgical precision. Directors asked whether he knew of his brother's involvement earlier than disclosed, whether he had allowed the scandal to unfold until it served his interests, whether Ify Anna James had been protected or strategically deployed. Jae-min answered every question with the same disciplined clarity. But in rooms like this, facts alone are sometimes insufficient. Institutions are not merely persuaded by evidence. They are persuaded by trust. And trust, once shaken, often requires a witness. Midway through the hearing, the board chair turned to Ify. Miss James, you are not obligated to participate. The offer was genuine. So was the risk. If she spoke, her testimony would permanently tie her name to one of Asia's most closely watched corporate scandals. If she remained silent, Jae-min might lose the confidence of his board. For several seconds, the chamber seemed to hold its breath. Ify rose. Her navy dress was simple and elegant. Her voice, when she began, was calm, steady, and impossible to ignore. I am here because my life was nearly destroyed by a man I intended to marry. She looked around the table. Chairman Kim did not create that danger. He interrupted it. A screen illuminated behind her as she presented the timeline she had reconstructed personally, timestamp by timestamp, email by email, authorization by authorization. She demonstrated that the decisive evidence linking Daniel Carter to the fraud and confirming her forged signatures arrived only hours before the wedding. Before that moment, Jae-min had suspicions. After that moment, he had proof. And once he had proof, he boarded a plane. Her final words landed with devastating simplicity. He did not exploit my humiliation. She turned toward Jae-min. He prevented my financial destruction. Then back to the board. If Chairman Kim had wanted to use me, he could have remained silent, allowed the marriage to proceed, and gained far greater leverage later. The room was utterly still, but he chose the only action that protected someone he had never met. Ify paused. Her voice softened, and I am standing here today because he acted when it was least convenient and most costly. Silence followed, not uncertain silence, the kind that occurs when truth has fully occupied a room. The board members reviewed the timeline, asked additional technical questions, cross-checked the timestamps against internal records. Every answer confirmed her account. One by one, skepticism began to dissolve. The narrative shifted. Jae-min was no longer the man who weaponized a bride's heartbreak. He was the executive who placed an innocent woman's protection above reputational convenience, even while unknowingly approaching a war within his own family. After nearly 4 hours, the board chair delivered the decision. The board unanimously reaffirmed confidence in Chairman Jae-min Kim. An expanded investigation would proceed. Min-ho Kim's suspension would remain in force, and the company would publicly acknowledge Ify Anna James as a protected victim and critical witness. The Empire had spoken. Jae-min remained standing. The directors slowly departed. Attorneys gathered their files. Screens dimmed. At last, the council chamber emptied, leaving only Ify and Jae-min alone against the glittering skyline of Seoul. For a long moment, neither moved. The emotional intensity of the day lingered between them like a charged field. Jae-min approached her with uncharacteristic slowness. There was no corporate distance now, no strategic reserve. Only a man whose carefully guarded world had just been preserved by a woman who owed him nothing. He stopped close enough that Ify could hear the quiet steadiness of his breathing. His dark eyes held hers, and when he spoke, his voice was lower than she had ever heard it. "You defended me." A brief pause. The next words carried the weight of something far more personal than gratitude. "When you had every reason to hate me." The space between them seemed to narrow. Not because either moved, but because something essential had changed. For the first time, Ify realized that the most dangerous thing in Seoul was not the scandal. It was the growing possibility that she was beginning to trust the one man capable of breaking her heart in an entirely different way. There are moments when love does not announce itself with grand declarations. It arrives quietly, in the spaces where two wounded people stop performing strength long enough to be honest. By the time the board of the Kim Global Holdings reaffirmed its confidence in Jae-min Kim, something profound had shifted between him and Ify Anna James. The change was subtle. No confessions had been made, no boundaries formally crossed, no promises spoken, and yet every conversation now carried an awareness neither could ignore. The distance between them had become charged, not with uncertainty, with possibility. And possibility, if he was discovering, could be far more dangerous than certainty. In the days that followed, the investigation continued, but the frantic urgency began to soften. Key evidence had been secured. The board was stabilized. Minho's legal team retreated into defensive maneuvering. For the first time since her wedding collapsed, Ify experienced something unfamiliar. Breathing room. And in that breathing room, she began to see aspects of Seoul and of Jae-min that existed beyond crisis. One evening, after another long day in the executive war room, Jae-min closed the final file and looked across the conference table. "You have been staring at numbers for 14 hours. Ify arched an eyebrow. "Is that your version of concern?" "It is my version of an observation." The corner of her mouth lifted. Jae-min regarded her for a moment, then said quietly, "Come with me." An hour later, they stood at Namsan Seoul Tower, high above the glittering city. The night air was cool. The skyline stretched endlessly beneath them, a living constellation of neon and river light. Tourists lingered at a distance, but Jae-min led her to a quieter terrace shielded from the crowds. Ify leaned against the railing, taking in the view. "It's beautiful." Jae-min stood beside her, hands in his coat pockets. "When my life becomes too loud, I come here." She turned to him. The admission was startling in its intimacy, not because it was dramatic, because it was personal. Jae-min Kim did not reveal himself easily. Every private truth he offered felt like something carefully chosen and rarely given. Over the next several days, he showed her other places. A secluded tea house tucked into the hills of Bukchon Hanek village. A narrow bookshop in Insadong, where he sometimes spent an hour in silence. A quiet walking path along the Han River, where he went after difficult board meetings. Each place revealed a different truth about him. Beneath the power, there was discipline. Beneath the discipline, solitude. Beneath the solitude, a man who had built extraordinary structures around a heart he trusted very few people to see. And without realizing when it happened, Ify began looking forward to the hours that belonged only to them. They laughed more. She challenged him more openly. He allowed himself to smile more often, and every rare smile altered his face so completely that it felt almost unfair. The man the world described as cold turned out to possess a dry wit, a surprising tenderness, and an attentiveness so precise it bordered on reverence. He remembered how she took her tea. He noticed when she was tired before she admitted it. He listened as if every word she spoke deserved full consideration. Daniel had once made her feel chosen. Jae-min made her feel understood. The difference was staggering. One rainy evening, they returned late to the penthouse after dinner. The city shimmered beyond the glass, blurred by water and reflected light. Inside, the atmosphere felt unusually still. No attorneys, no analysts, no urgent calls, only the muted sound of rain and the charged quiet of two people standing at the edge of something neither had intended. Ify removed her coat slowly. Jae-min took it from her with a gentleness that felt more intimate than touch. Their fingers brushed. Neither stepped back. The space between them seemed to narrow of its own accord. Ify looked up. His dark eyes held hers with an intensity that made her pulse quicken. Not demanding, not presumptuous, simply honest. For a moment, the world beyond the windows disappeared. There was no scandal, no fraud, no family opposition, only a man and a woman who had found, in each other, an unexpected refuge. Jae-min lifted one hand and lightly touched a loose curl near her face. The gesture was so careful, so restrained, that emotion tightened in her throat. His voice was barely above a whisper. Fee. Her name in his mouth sounded like something both cherished and dangerous. He leaned closer, slowly, giving her every opportunity to move away. She could feel his breath, could see the slightest uncertainty beneath his legendary composure, could sense how much this moment mattered to him. And that realization terrified her. At the last second, Ify placed a trembling hand against his chest, not to reject him, to stop time. Tears filled her eyes. I want this. The confession hung between them, raw and vulnerable. Jae-min remained perfectly still. She swallowed hard. But my heart is still healing. There it was, the truth. She was falling for him. And the very fact that she was falling awakened all the fear Daniel had left behind. Fear of misjudgment, fear of dependency, fear of giving trust before the wounds beneath it had closed. For one agonizing second, she feared disappointment would cross his face, that he would persuade, insist, advance anyway. Instead, Jae-min stepped back, not in offense, not in frustration, in respect. His expression softened. You do not owe me your heart before it is ready. The words settled over her like a blessing. No pressure, no wounded pride, no manipulation, only patience. And that patience made her feel safer than any kiss could have. After she went to her room, Ify sat awake for a long time. Rain traced silver lines down the windows. Her fingertips still tingled where they had touched his chest. She realized, with equal parts wonder and fear, that Jae-min's restraint had done more to deepen her feelings than any passionate embrace could have. Because desire can be easy. Patience is costly. And only a man who values a woman beyond possession is willing to wait. The next morning, Ify descended to the breakfast room, feeling both unsettled and strangely peaceful. For the first time in weeks, she allowed herself to imagine a future that was not defined by damage control. Jae-min was already at the table, reading briefing materials with his customary calm. When he looked up, nothing in his demeanor suggested discomfort. No awkwardness, no pressure. Only the same steady regard that had become her unexpected shelter. She had never found restraint so profoundly attractive. Then, Secretary Kim entered. Her usually composed face was unusually grave. Chairman. She placed a tablet on the table. He landed at Incheon International Airport 40 minutes ago. Ify frowned. Who? Secretary Kim turned the screen toward them. A photograph filled the display. Tailored suit, confident smile, eyes that once convinced her he loved her. Daniel Carter. Her pulse stopped. Secretary Kim's next words changed the emotional temperature of the room instantly. He has arrived in Seoul and requested a meeting. The peace of the previous night evaporated. Across the table, Jae Min's expression became dangerously still. And Ify understood with sudden clarity that the man who had nearly destroyed her was no longer fighting from another continent. He was here. There are men who lose a woman and grieve, and there are men who lose control and call it love. Ify Anna James understood the difference the moment she saw Daniel Carter's face on Secretary Kim's tablet. The image was recent. He stood in the arrivals hall of Incheon International Airport wearing a tailored navy suit and the same polished confidence that had once convinced her he was safe. Once, that smile had represented stability. Now it looked like a weapon. The peace she had begun to build in Seoul shattered in an instant, because betrayal becomes truly dangerous when it refuses to accept defeat. Across the breakfast table, Jae Min Kim set down his coffee cup with meticulous calm. To an untrained eye, he appeared unchanged, but Ify recognized the subtle transformation, the stillness in his shoulders, the sharpened focus in his gaze, the quiet recalculation of a man who had just identified a new threat vector. "When did he contact us?" Jae Min asked. Secretary Kim consulted her notes. 32 minutes after landing, he requested a private meeting with Ms. James. Ify's pulse hammered. A private meeting. As if he were still entitled to her time. As if he had crossed continents not to answer for his crimes, but to continue rewriting the story. Jae Min turned to her. The question in his eyes was unmistakable. Your decision, no pressure, no command, no attempt to shield her from her own agency. That alone steadied her. "I'll meet him," she said. The meeting was arranged in a secured conference room at Kim Global's Seoul headquarters. Neutral territory, glass walls overlooking the city, security nearby but discreet, no opportunity for theatrics. Daniel entered precisely at 2 o'clock. For one disorienting moment, Ify felt the ghost of the man she had once intended to marry. The familiar walk, the familiar voice, the familiar charm. Trauma has a strange memory. Even after truth is revealed, parts of the heart still recognize the shape of what they once loved. Daniel's expression softened as though they were simply recovering from an unfortunate misunderstanding. Ify. Her name on his lips no longer felt tender. It felt invasive. He sat across from her and leaned forward, lowering his voice to the intimate tone that had once dismantled her defenses. "I know what this looks like." Ify said nothing. Daniel pressed on. "You think I betrayed you?" "You did." Pain flickered across his face, or something skillfully resembling pain. "I made mistakes, but Jae Min Kim is not what you think." There it was, the real purpose of his trip, not confession, not repentance, disruption. Daniel's eyes darkened. He planned this. Ify's breath caught. He knew about the investigation long before the wedding. He waited until the ceremony because public humiliation gave him leverage. Daniel leaned closer. "You were never the victim to him, Ify." His voice dropped to a whisper. "You were an opportunity." The word struck precisely where her healing remained most fragile, because beneath her growing trust in Jae Min lived an unspoken fear. What if she had misjudged again? What if she had mistaken competence for character? What if she had moved from one sophisticated manipulator to another? Daniel saw the uncertainty in her eyes and immediately pressed harder. He wanted to be the hero. A bitter smile touched his mouth. "And now look at you. Living in his penthouse, depending on his lawyers, falling for the man who orchestrated your rescue." The sentence landed like a blade because it touched the one truth she had tried hardest not to name. She was falling for Jae Min, and for one terrible moment, doubt entered her like poison. When the meeting ended, Ify returned to the penthouse in a state of emotional disarray. Every conversation with Jae Min replayed in her mind. The church, the evidence room, the board hearing, the almost kiss. Had it all been genuine or brilliantly timed? She found Jae Min in his study overlooking the Han River. He looked up immediately. One glance at her face told him everything. Daniel had succeeded in opening a wound. Ify spoke before he could. Did you know earlier than you told me? The question hung between them, sharp and unavoidable. Any defensive man would have argued. Any manipulative man would have rushed to reassure her. Any insecure man would have demanded trust. Jae Min did none of those things. He rose, crossed to the wall safe, and entered a code. From within, he removed a thick black binder. He placed it on the desk between them. The complete investigation file. Ify stared at it. Every memo, every email, every timestamp, every internal note, nothing redacted, nothing withheld. His voice was quiet. Read everything. She looked up. Aren't you going to explain? Jae Min held her gaze. If my integrity requires persuasion, then it is not integrity. The words settled over the room with devastating force. He stepped back, not in anger, in respect. When you are finished, decide for yourself who is telling the truth. And with that, he left her alone. No chase, no plea, no attempt to control the outcome, only evidence and freedom. Ify read until dawn. Page after page dismantled Daniel's narrative. The earliest suspicions were inconclusive. The decisive proof arrived only hours before the wedding. Jae Min had convened council immediately, boarded the first available flight, and acted at enormous reputational risk. No hidden strategy, no secret manipulation. Only a man who chose truth over convenience. As the sun rose over Seoul, Ify closed the final binder and felt a profound mixture of relief and shame. She had doubted him, and he had responded by trusting her with every fact, not because he feared losing her, because he respected her judgment. In that moment, her feelings for Jae Min deepened from attraction into something far more dangerous: trust. Later that morning, Daniel was served with additional legal notices in the lobby of his hotel. He erupted. Security footage captured him shoving the documents aside and speaking with the kind of reckless fury that accompanies the collapse of carefully maintained illusions. His attorney attempted to calm him. Daniel's response was cold, raw, and terrifying. He looked toward the skyline where Kim Global's tower dominated the city and said through clenched teeth, "If I cannot have her." He paused, hatred replacing charm completely. "I'll destroy both of you." The most dangerous lie is not the one people whisper. It is the one that arrives wearing your own name. By the time Ify Anna James finished reading the last page of Jae Min Kim's investigation file, she knew two things with painful certainty. First, she trusted him more than she had trusted any man in years. Second, Daniel Carter had not come to Seoul to apologize. He had come to set fire to her credibility before the truth could fully exonerate her. She just did not realize how quickly he intended to strike. The attack began at 6:47 a.m. Secretary Kim entered the penthouse study with the controlled urgency of someone who had learned that calm is most necessary when circumstances become explosive. She placed a tablet on the desk. "Miss James," she said quietly, "you need to see this." Ify looked down. A financial news alert flashed across multiple international outlets. The headline was surgical in its cruelty. New documents suggest Ify Anna James may have participated in multi-million-dollar fraud. Her breath caught. Jae Min stepped closer as she opened the attached files. At first glance, the documents appeared devastating. Joint strategy memos, authorization forms, internal emails, and at the bottom of several pages, her signature. Not a poor imitation, not an obvious forgery, her signature, perfectly replicated, placed beneath language suggesting she had knowingly agreed to share profits after the merger. For one disorienting moment, Ify felt the floor tilt beneath her. The room around her blurred. If the documents were accepted as authentic, everything changed. She would no longer be viewed as a victim. She would become a co-conspirator. Her business could be permanently destroyed. Her accounts could be seized. And depending on how prosecutors interpreted the evidence, she could face criminal charges on 2 continents. The media reacted with savage efficiency. Commentators who had cautiously supported her began retreating. Headlines turned skeptical. Legal analysts speculated about possible indictments. Social media erupted with vindicated cruelty. Daniel was telling the truth. She played both men. She wanted the merger money. Never trust appearances. The world that had begun to reconsider her innocence now swung violently back toward suspicion. Reputations, Ify was learning, are much easier to stain than to restore. Within an hour, Kim Global's legal and compliance teams filled the executive war room. Screens displayed the forged documents. Forensic analysts compared metadata. Outside counsel reviewed jurisdictional exposure. The atmosphere was grim. One senior attorney spoke with careful precision. If these materials gain traction before we discredit them, prosecutors may open formal inquiries naming Ms. James as a willing participant. The sentence hit like a hammer. Possible charges, actual legal jeopardy. The stakes were no longer merely emotional or reputational. They were existential. Jae Min's response was immediate. He authorized additional forensic teams, expanded international counsel, and a public statement asserting his full confidence in Ify's innocence. The decision was extraordinary. Several board members objected. One director warned that tying the company's reputation to a potentially accused foreign witness could destabilize shareholder confidence. Jae Min's answer was delivered in the same calm tone he used when announcing irreversible decisions. Truth is not a reputational risk. The room went silent. The order stood. In that moment, Ify understood the magnitude of what he was doing. He was placing his own credibility, and by extension, the credibility of one of Asia's most powerful corporations, behind her. Not because it was safe, because he believed her. Later that evening, Ify stood alone on the terrace overlooking the Han River. The city glittered below, indifferent to her fear. She heard the doors open softly behind her. Jae Min joined her, his presence steady and reassuring. For several moments, neither spoke. Then he said quietly, "My legal team can handle this." Ify turned to him. Moonlight traced the controlled strength of his face. She loved that he wanted to protect her. That knowledge alone was powerful enough to unsettle her. But something inside her had changed. She had spent too many weeks being spoken about, interpreted, defended, attacked. She was tired of being a narrative in other people's mouths. "I know you can handle it," she said. His gaze sharpened slightly. "Then what are you thinking?" Ify drew a slow breath. "I'm thinking that if I hide behind you, Daniel wins in a different way." The words surprised even her, because they were absolutely true. Daniel had built his scheme on the assumption that she would remain trusting, passive, and dependent. Then, after exposure, he assumed she would remain frightened enough to let others speak for her. He still did not understand the woman he had nearly destroyed. Jae Min studied her in silence. There was no attempt to dissuade her. No protective command, only deep, focused attention. "What do you intend to do?" Ify lifted her chin. The fear remained. But beneath it, something stronger had taken root. Resolve. "I intend to tell the truth myself." The faintest shift crossed his expression, something between admiration and concern. A public response will intensify scrutiny. "I know. You will be questioned aggressively. I know. Your words will be examined worldwide." She held his gaze. "Then they should hear them from me." For several seconds, Jae Min said nothing. Then, with quiet sincerity, he spoke the words that mattered most. "I will stand behind you. Not in front of you, not instead of you. Behind you." The distinction touched her more deeply than he could have known. The following morning, senior advisors assembled to discuss media strategy. Recommendations ranged from carefully worded statements to temporary silence. Ify listened, then made her decision. The room became still. Even seasoned communications executives seemed to recognize the significance of what she was about to do. She was no longer merely surviving scandal. She was stepping into it voluntarily, determined to confront it in full view of the world. Secretary Kim looked up from her tablet. "Ms. James, should I prepare a written statement?" Ify's voice was calm, unshaking, and more powerful than she realized. No. She straightened in her chair, every inch the woman Daniel had disastrously underestimated. "Schedule a press conference." The words landed like the opening shot of a war that would now be fought in public. Across the room, Jae-min met her eyes, and in his steady gaze, Ify saw something unmistakable: pride. Because the woman he had crossed an ocean to protect was no longer standing under his shield. She was stepping onto the battlefield herself. There comes a moment in every great unraveling when the person at the center of the story must decide whether to remain an object of speculation or become the author of the truth. For weeks, Ify Anna James had been described by other people: the abandoned bride, the possible accomplice, the woman caught between a disgraced fiancé and a Korean billionaire. She had been pitied, mocked, doubted, defended, and dissected. Her pain had become content. Her reputation had become a public debate, and her silence, though understandable, had left a vacuum others were eager to fill. But silence has an expiration date, and when it ends, it can sound like judgment. The press conference was scheduled for 11 a.m. in the Global Media Auditorium at Kim Global Holdings headquarters in Seoul. By 10:30, every seat was filled. Financial journalists, international news outlets, legal correspondents, gossip bloggers, television crews from Seoul, Atlanta, London, and Singapore. The world had come expecting scandal. What they were about to witness was something far more powerful: a woman reclaiming ownership of her own name. Backstage, Ify stood before a mirror in a tailored ivory suit. The choice of color was deliberate: not bridal white, judicial white, the white of clarity, the white of a page rewritten. Her natural curls framed her face with elegant strength. Her makeup was understated. Her posture was extraordinary, not because she felt fearless, because she had decided that fear would no longer dictate the terms of her story. Her mother, Grace James, had called from Atlanta before dawn. "You do not need to sound perfect," she had said. "You only need to sound like the truth." Ify carried those words with her as she stepped toward the stage. From the wings, Jae-min Kim watched in silence. He wore a dark suit and the same controlled expression he carried into boardrooms and legal confrontations. But inwardly, something far less disciplined was unfolding: admiration, protectiveness, and a growing affection he no longer had the strength to dismiss as temporary. He had first seen Ify as a name on a forged document, then as a victim standing in the aisle of a ruined wedding, then as a brilliant mind capable of detecting what seasoned analysts missed. Now he was about to see her do something even rarer: turn pain into authority. The realization affected him more deeply than he cared to admit. The room rose slightly in volume as Ify stepped to the podium. Flashes ignited, questions erupted. She raised one hand, and without speaking a word, brought the entire auditorium to silence. When she began, her voice was calm, clear, and impossible to ignore. "My name is Ify Anna James." A simple sentence, yet spoken with the quiet force of a woman who had decided that her own name belonged to her again. "Several weeks ago, I walked into a church believing I was about to begin a life built on love and trust." A pause. "Instead, I discovered that the man I intended to marry had used my identity, my company, and my financial history without my knowledge." The screens behind her illuminated with verified timelines and forensic analyses. No theatrics, only facts. She detailed the forged signatures, the unauthorized guarantees, the transfer of nearly $500,000 from her business account, the plan to marry her and bind her legally before the fraudulent merger closed. Then she said the sentence that altered the emotional tone of the entire room. I was not a partner in this scheme. Her eyes swept the audience. I was its intended final victim. Questions followed, sharp, aggressive, expected. Miss James, were you romantically involved with Chairman Kim before the wedding? No. Did you knowingly sign any of these documents? No. Why should the public believe you now? Ify's expression remained steady. Because truth survives forensic examination. The room quieted. Then she continued, no longer speaking merely as a witness, but as a woman transformed by betrayal. I loved someone who saw my trust as an asset to be leveraged. Her voice softened, but did not weaken. That experience has taught me something I wish I had learned earlier. She placed both hands on the podium. Your kindness is not consent to be exploited. Your love is not permission to be deceived. And your signature, whether written on paper or written with your life, should never be surrendered to someone who values access more than your heart. For several seconds, no one moved. The words landed far beyond the legal scandal. They touched something universal. The audience was no longer watching a disgraced bride. They were listening to a woman who had survived betrayal and emerged with greater clarity than before. From the wings, Jae-min remained motionless. But inside, the impact was profound. He had admired her intelligence. He had respected her courage. Now he witnessed the full measure of her character. Ify was not merely recovering. She was converting pain into power, and he found himself experiencing a rare and unsettling certainty. He did not simply want to protect her. He wanted to stand beside her for the rest of his life. The press conference concluded to a silence more meaningful than applause. Within minutes, the response began shifting. Legal analysts praised the forensic clarity of her presentation. Commentators reversed earlier assumptions. Social media, once merciless, filled with messages of support. She was set up. She is stronger than anyone knew. This woman is extraordinary. The narrative changed, not because public opinion had become kinder, because truth, when spoken without apology, can be impossible to dismiss. For the first time since the wedding, the world began seeing Ify Anna James not as a scandal, but as a woman worth believing. That evening, exhausted but steadier than she had felt in weeks, Ify returned to the penthouse overlooking the Han River. The city lights shimmered below. She should have felt relief. Instead, she felt something more complex. Hope, dangerous, fragile hope. She had survived public humiliation. She had reclaimed her name. And somewhere between legal filings and late-night conversations, she had begun to fall in love with the man who entered her life like a storm and remained like shelter. But while truth was winning in public, new alliances were forming in private. Near midnight, Kim Global Security Director entered Jae-min's study and placed several surveillance photographs on his desk. The images were grainy but unmistakable. At a discreet private lounge in the Shilla Seoul, Daniel Carter sat across from a woman whose elegance and composure were impossible to mistake. Madam Kim. Jae-min stared at the photographs, his expression turning dangerously still. Because there are few combinations more volatile than a desperate man and a mother determined to protect her family at any cost. And for the first time, Ify's greatest enemy and Jae-min's most formidable adversary were sitting at the same table. There are wars fought in courtrooms, wars fought in boardrooms, wars fought in the hidden architecture of contracts, signatures, and money. But the most intimate wars are often fought across a single table between two women who understand exactly what is at stake. By the morning after the press conference, Ify Anna James had become something dangerous to the Kim family, not because she was loud, not because she was manipulative, but because she had survived public humiliation, reclaimed her name, and awakened feelings in Jae-min Kim that were beginning to outweigh decades of carefully enforced obedience. And mothers who build dynasties rarely fear weak women. They fear the ones their sons are willing to choose. The invitation arrived shortly after breakfast, a handwritten card on cream stationery. No elaborate explanation, only a time and location, tea at 2 o'clock, the Orchid Pavilion. The message was signed with a single, unmistakable name, Madam Kim. Ify held the card between her fingers and felt a familiar tightening in her chest. This was not hospitality. It was strategy. She knew it instinctively, and yet she accepted. Not because she was naive, because some battles cannot be avoided. They must be met directly. The Orchid Pavilion overlooked a private garden on the grounds of the Kim estate. The setting was exquisite. Stone paths, koi ponds, carefully shaped pines. The sort of beauty created by generations of money and control. Madam Kim was already seated when Ify arrived. She wore a pale silk hanbok-inspired ensemble and the expression of a woman accustomed to deciding which lives remained within the boundaries of her family. Tea was poured. Polite observations were exchanged. The weather, the city, the success of the press conference. Then, with the same elegance she used to arrange flowers and financial alliances, Madam Kim placed a leather portfolio on the table. She turned it toward Ify. Inside were transfer documents and account details. The amount was staggering. Enough to restore every dollar Daniel had stolen. Enough to expand Ify's business several times over. Enough to change the trajectory of most lives. Madam Kim folded her hands. You are an intelligent woman. Ify did not touch the portfolio. I try to be. The older woman inclined her head slightly. Then you understand practical solutions. Madam Kim's voice remained calm, almost maternal. My son is a complicated man. A delicate pause. He feels responsible for people who are hurt. The implication was surgical. Jae-min's care was not love, only obligation. Madam Kim continued. You have been through a public ordeal. This compensation will help you rebuild your life in America with dignity. Ify met her gaze. And in exchange? The answer came without hesitation. You leave Korea. The words landed softly, but their meaning was absolute. Not a request, a purchase order. The older woman's eyes sharpened. You are strong, articulate, and admirable in your own way. The compliment felt colder than an insult. But admiration is not acceptance. She leaned forward slightly. Our family has survived because we understand that emotion must never be permitted to destabilize legacy. Then she delivered the sentence she had likely rehearsed. You will never truly belong here. For a brief moment, the old wounds stirred. The abandoned bride, the scandal, the foreign woman in a world built long before her arrival. It would have been easy to take the money, to call it compensation, to retreat with her dignity intact and her heart protected. But Ify had spent too much of her life fighting to know her own worth. And worth, once understood, cannot be bought. She closed the portfolio and slid it gently back across the table. Her voice was calm, unshaking, and more powerful than anger. I lost a wedding. She held Madam Kim's gaze without blinking. Not my dignity. The words settled over the garden like a verdict. For the first time, genuine surprise flickered across Madam Kim's face. Ify rose from her chair. I did not come to Korea looking for your son. A pause. But I will not disappear simply because my presence makes powerful people uncomfortable. Then she turned and walked away, leaving millions of dollars untouched on the table. What neither woman realized immediately was that they had not been alone. Jae-min had returned unexpectedly to the estate after receiving confirmation of Daniel's late-night meeting with his mother. As he approached the pavilion, he heard enough. The money, the demand, Ify's refusal, and the sentence that struck him with almost painful force. I lost a wedding, not my dignity. He stood motionless as Ify disappeared down the garden path. For several seconds, he remained where he was, absorbing the full meaning of what had just occurred. The woman he loved, though he had not yet spoken the word, had been offered wealth, security, and escape, and she had chosen self-respect instead. In that moment, whatever uncertainty remained inside him disappeared. Jae-min entered the pavilion. Madam Kim looked up, instantly recognizing from her son's expression that something fundamental had changed. He did not sit. He remained standing, tall and immovable, the controlled force that had built an empire. His voice was quiet. Did you attempt to pay Miss James to leave Korea? Madam Kim set down her teacup with deliberate composure. I attempted to protect this family. Jae-min's gaze did not soften. She does not need your protection. The older woman's eyes narrowed. She is a complication. No. For the first time in his life, he interrupted his mother without hesitation. She is a woman of integrity. The silence that followed was historic, because this was not merely a disagreement. It was a transfer of moral authority. Madam Kim spoke carefully. You would challenge your family for someone you have known only weeks? Jae-min answered with devastating clarity. I would challenge anyone who mistakes control for love. The word struck harder than accusation. For a moment, even Madam Kim seemed unable to respond. Then Jae-min delivered the decision that altered the internal balance of the Kim family. Ms. James will remain in Seoul as long as she chooses. He leaned slightly forward. And if she becomes part of my life, that will be my decision, not yours. Without waiting for a reply, he turned and left. For the first time, he had chosen not inheritance, not obedience, and not family expectations, but the woman who had refused to sell herself. That evening, Ify stood alone on the penthouse terrace overlooking the Han River. The city lights shimmered beneath a velvet sky. She heard footsteps behind her. She did not turn immediately, but she knew who it was. Jae-min stopped beside her. For several moments, they watched the river in silence. Then he spoke. His voice was lower than usual, stripped of the corporate distance and protective formality. I heard what you said to my mother. Ify exhaled slowly. I meant every word. Jae-min turned toward her. His dark eyes held an honesty so direct it made her pulse quicken. When I walked into that church in Atlanta, he paused, choosing each word with extraordinary care. I did not come to your wedding to steal you. The night seemed to grow still around them. Then his expression softened in a way she had never seen before. Vulnerability and certainty, perfectly balanced. But I would be lying if I said I don't want your heart now. The confession settled between them like the beginning of something inevitable. And for the first time since her world had fallen apart, Ify felt the terrifying and beautiful possibility that everything she lost had been clearing a path to something infinitely greater. There are confessions that change nothing, and there are confessions that alter the gravitational field between two lives. When Jae-min Kim told Ify Anna James he had not come to her wedding to steal her, but could no longer deny that he wanted her heart, the world did not explode. No orchestra swelled, no dramatic kiss followed. The Han River continued to flow beneath the penthouse terrace. The city lights continued to shimmer against the night. And yet, for both of them, something irreversible had begun. Because once truth is spoken, silence is no longer neutral. Silence becomes a decision. Ify did not answer immediately. Her pulse hammered so hard she could hear it in her ears. She had imagined many things in the weeks since her wedding collapsed. Financial ruin, public disgrace, the possibility of rebuilding from ashes. What she had not imagined was standing under the Seoul sky with a man whose integrity had become more attractive to her than wealth, power, or charm ever could. And that terrified her. Not because she felt uncertain, because she felt certain enough to be afraid. She turned toward him slowly. The vulnerability in his eyes unsettled her more than any grand gesture could have. Jae-min Kim, disciplined, controlled, nearly mythic in his composure, was standing before her without strategy, only honesty. Ivy drew a trembling breath. I do have feelings for you. The words left her like a secret finally given air. Jae-min remained perfectly still, as if any sudden movement might fracture the moment. But joy, quiet, profound, and carefully restrained, passed across his face. Then Ivy's expression changed. The truth continued. And that scares me. She wrapped her arms around herself, looking out at the river as if searching for courage in its dark movement. I just walked away from a wedding. Her voice grew softer. The world already thinks I traded one man for another. She swallowed hard. Some people will say I was waiting for a billionaire to rescue me. The confession exposed more than fear of gossip. It revealed a deeper concern. That beginning something with Jae-min too soon might diminish the authenticity of what was growing between them. That her healing might be mistaken for opportunism. That their love story might be reduced to scandalous headlines rather than understood as the slow emergence of trust. Jae-min listened without interruption. When she finished, he stepped closer, but not so close that she felt cornered. His voice was low and steady. Then let them talk. Ify turned to him. He held her gaze with extraordinary tenderness. I have spent my life being judged by people who confuse appearances with truth. A faint, almost rueful smile touched his mouth. I can wait longer. The simplicity of the statement nearly undid her. Not I will convince you, not I will prove myself. Simply, I can wait. The words settled into her like warmth. For the first time in her adult life, Ivy experienced something she had not known she needed. A love that did not demand immediate access. A love willing to remain at the threshold until she invited it fully inside. Tears filled her eyes. This time, she did not step away. Instead, she leaned into him. Jae-min wrapped his arms around her with the same care he brought to everything that mattered. The embrace was not possessive. It was shelter. And as she rested against his chest, listening to the steady rhythm of his heartbeat, Ivy understood a truth that both comforted and frightened her. She was no longer falling. She had already fallen. But while love was learning patience on the penthouse terrace, Daniel Carter was preparing one final act of destruction. At a luxury suite in the Shilla Seoul, Daniel sat before multiple screens and encrypted drives. The charming fiancé was gone. What remained was a man who had confused possession with devotion and retaliation with justice. His alliance with Madam Kim had not produced the outcome he wanted. Ivy had not left. Jae-min had not retreated. And the emotional bond between them was becoming increasingly obvious. Daniel interpreted this not as consequence, but as theft. In his mind, Jae-min had taken what belonged to him. And if he could not reclaim Ivy, he would destroy the foundation on which their future might be built. Using credentials obtained through Minho's compromise network, Daniel assembled a package of confidential Kim Global documents, board communications, acquisition plans, sensitive strategic projections. If leaked, the files could trigger regulatory scrutiny and severe market consequences. More importantly, Daniel designed the metadata trail to implicate Ivy. It was elegant in its cruelty. The same woman he had nearly married and financially ruined would appear to have stolen proprietary information from the man she was beginning to love. The resulting scandal could devastate them both. Daniel leaned back in his chair and smiled with the exhausted triumph of someone mistaking vengeance for destiny. The following afternoon, as Ivy reviewed testimony drafts in the penthouse study, her phone vibrated. The message arrived from an untraceable number. No greeting, no explanation, only a single sentence. Come alone, or Jae-min loses everything. Attached was a photograph. A laptop screen displaying confidential Kim Global files, and beneath it, a time and location, an abandoned warehouse along the industrial edge of the Han River. Ivy's blood ran cold. The message was unmistakable. Daniel had escalated beyond defamation, beyond financial theft. He was now threatening the man who had crossed an ocean to save her. For several seconds, she sat perfectly still, her heart pounding with the terrible recognition that love had just become a vulnerability her enemies intended to exploit. Then she looked toward the terrace doors, where Jae-min stood unaware of the danger closing around them. And Ify faced the most consequential decision of her life, whether to trust the man she loved or walk alone into the darkness to protect him. There are nights when everything seems to depend on one impossible decision. And there are nights when love reveals itself not through reckless sacrifice, but through the wisdom to stop facing danger alone. At 11:42 p.m., standing in the study of the penthouse overlooking the Han River, Ify Anna James stared at the message on her phone. Come alone, or Jae-min loses everything. Only weeks earlier, she might have gone, quietly, desperately, believing that protecting the people she loved required bearing every burden by herself. But betrayal had taught her something painful and necessary. Isolation is where manipulators are strongest. Trust is where they lose control. For several seconds, fear battled instinct. Then Ify did the bravest thing she had done since walking away from her wedding. She turned toward Jae-min Kim and handed him the phone. Jae-min read the message without visible reaction. Yet Ify saw the immediate transformation she had come to recognize. The slight stillness in his shoulders, the sharpening of his gaze, the rapid internal calculations of a man who knew precisely how much was at stake. When he looked up, his eyes held something deeper than strategic concern, trust, because she had chosen not to disappear into danger. She had chosen him. You showed me, he said quietly. Ify's voice trembled, but her resolve did not. I'm done fighting alone. For a moment, neither moved. Then Jae-min touched her cheek with extraordinary tenderness. And in that brief gesture, gratitude, relief, and love passed between them without a single explicit declaration. The response was immediate. Within minutes, Kim Global's legal, cybersecurity, and security teams transformed the penthouse into a command center. Encrypted communications were established, microphones were prepared, surveillance units deployed. The warehouse location along the river was mapped and secured. Every scenario was rehearsed, every risk calculated. But the most critical element of the operation was neither technology nor strategy. It was Ify, because Daniel still believed she was the same trusting woman he had manipulated at the altar. He had no idea she now understood exactly how his mind worked, and he had no defense against a woman who was no longer afraid of the truth. The following evening, Ify entered the abandoned warehouse wearing a discreet recording device concealed beneath her coat. The cavernous space was lit by harsh industrial lamps. Stacks of crates cast long shadows across the concrete floor. Daniel emerged from the darkness with the same self-assured smile that had once convinced her he was safe. For a fleeting moment, she saw the ghost of the man she had planned to marry. Then she remembered the forged signatures, the stolen funds, the public lies, and the memory dissolved. Daniel spread his arms slightly. I knew you would come. Ify stood tall. No, you knew the woman you used to control would come. His smile faltered. For the first time, he sensed that the emotional landscape had changed. Daniel attempted charm first, then regret, then accusation. He insisted everything had begun as a misunderstanding. He claimed Jae-min manipulated circumstances to appear heroic. He pleaded for one final chance. When none of it worked, the mask finally cracked. The bitterness underneath surfaced in full. You were supposed to be my future, he snapped. If I had to use your company to get where I needed to go, that was temporary. Ify held his gaze. You forged my signature. Yes. The word came out like a challenge. You stole my money. Yes. You framed me. Daniel laughed, a sound emptied of affection and filled with resentment. You would have thanked me when the merger closed. Every admission streamed in real time to Jae-min, Kim Global Counsel, and waiting investigators. Daniel, in his arrogance, was dismantling himself. Then he made the fatal mistake. He stepped closer, eyes blazing with obsession. I only escalated because he took you from me. Ify's voice was steady. No one can take what you never valued. Daniel's expression hardened. If I can't have you, neither can he. That sentence was enough. Security officers entered from every direction. Lights flooded the warehouse. Attorneys and investigators emerged from the shadows. Daniel spun in disbelief as officers informed him that his confession had been recorded and transmitted to multiple jurisdictions. For the first time since the wedding, Daniel Carter understood a truth he had spent months denying. He had lost, completely. The consequences unfolded with breathtaking speed. International authorities opened coordinated fraud proceedings. The forged documents were formally discredited. All allegations against Ify were withdrawn. Her name was cleared in every jurisdiction. Financial institutions restored her standing. The stolen funds were recovered. Min Ho Kim was permanently removed from Kim Global Holdings and referred for prosecution. Evidence of Madam Kim's covert coordination with Daniel triggered a governance review that stripped her of nearly all informal influence within the family empire. For the first time in decades, the Kim dynasty began operating beyond the reach of maternal control. And at the center of these extraordinary reversals stood the woman nearly destroyed by a forged signature. Public opinion transformed almost overnight. The narrative that had once treated Ify as scandal now celebrated her as a symbol of resilience and clarity. Business publications praised her courage. Women around the world shared her press conference and quoted her words about dignity. Her inbox filled with messages from strangers thanking her for refusing to let betrayal define her. Ify Anna James was no longer known as the bride whose wedding collapsed. She had become the woman who rebuilt her name in full view of the world. Late the following afternoon, as the final legal notices were signed, Jae-min entered the war room carrying a quiet expression Ify had not seen before. The storm was over. For the first time since they met, nothing urgent stood between them. He extended his hand. Come with me. No explanation. No elaborate speech. Only the same calm certainty that had first brought him through the doors of her church. Ify took his hand. Hours later, a private jet descended toward Atlanta. Near midnight, a black car rolled to a stop outside the church where her life had once appeared to end. The sanctuary was dark, empty, silent. Jae-min unlocked the doors and guided her inside. Their footsteps echoed down the aisle where white roses and heartbreak had once shared the same space. Ify's breath caught, because she understood even before he spoke that he had not brought her back to revisit her pain. He had brought her back to redeem it. The church was silent. No guests, no flowers, no music trembling in the air. Only the soft echo of two sets of footsteps moving slowly down the aisle where Ify Anna James had once believed her life was ending. Moonlight filtered through stained glass windows, painting fractured colors across the pews. The sanctuary no longer felt like a place of humiliation. It felt like a place where history had paused long enough to be rewritten. At the altar, Jae-min Kim stopped and turned toward her. For several moments, he said nothing. The stillness between them was full, not empty. The kind of silence that appears when two people understand that what is about to be said matters more than anything money or power can purchase. Jae-min's dark eyes held hers with the same steady honesty that had first disarmed her in the aisle. But tonight there was something more. Vulnerability. The carefully guarded man who could dismantle corporations and silence boardrooms now stood before her with no defense except truth. His voice, when he finally spoke, was low and uncharacteristically raw. I have replayed this place in my mind many times. He glanced briefly around the sanctuary. The doors opening. Your face. The moment your world changed. His gaze returned to hers. I know I saved you from something catastrophic. A pause. But I also know that my arrival was the beginning of extraordinary pain. The words settled gently between them. No self-congratulation, no claim on her gratitude. Only a man acknowledging that even necessary truth can wound. Jae Min stepped closer. I am sorry for the way your life had to break before we met. Ife's eyes filled with tears. Because in one sentence, he honored both realities. He had protected her, and he grieved what it cost. She reached for his hand, the same hand that had carried evidence into a church, signed emergency legal orders, and steadied her through the most public collapse of her life. Her voice trembled, but her smile was luminous. That day did not destroy my life. Jae Min's expression softened. Ife drew a breath and spoke the truth that had been forming inside her for months. It revealed who was never meant to stand beside me. The sentence seemed to release something profound in both of them. The wedding that had once felt like a ruin was no longer a tragedy. It was a turning point, the doorway through which false love had exited and real love had entered. Jae Min lifted her hand to his lips and kissed it with a reverence that nearly undid her. No proposal followed, no ring, no pressure, because he understood something that many powerful men never learn. Love cannot be rushed simply because it is certain. Sometimes the most romantic act is patience. The months that followed became the most healing season of Ife's adult life. Back in Atlanta, she rebuilt her consulting firm stronger than before. Former clients returned. New opportunities emerged. Women who had followed her story sought her advice and encouragement. Her reputation, once threatened, became a source of influence and inspiration. And throughout it all, Jae Min courted her with a discipline as intentional as everything else he did. He did not assume access. He earned trust. Flowers arrived not extravagantly, but thoughtfully. Late-night calls bridged the distance between Atlanta and Seoul. He visited her mother and spoke with Grace James not as a billionaire, but as a man deeply in love with her daughter. He walked with Ife in public without hiding her, introduced her openly to colleagues and partners, never treated her as a secret, a scandal, or an impulsive romance. He chose her patiently, consistently, publicly, and in doing so, he healed wounds Daniel had left behind. Spring returned to Seoul. Cherry blossoms drifted through the air like quiet celebrations. One evening, Jae Min invited Ife to a private garden tucked behind a restored hanok in the hills above the city. Lanterns glowed softly among the trees. A stone path wound past blooming flowers and a reflecting pond. The atmosphere was intimate but not theatrical. No cameras, no audience, no spectacle. Just the two of them and the life they had built one deliberate step at a time. Ife sensed what was coming before he spoke. Her heart began to race. Jae Min led her to the center of the garden and turned to face her. For a moment, the formidable CEO disappeared entirely. What remained was simply a man profoundly grateful that the woman before him had chosen to trust him. He knelt, not as a performance, as an act of devotion. From his pocket, he removed a ring of extraordinary elegance, refined, luminous, and timeless. Yet even the diamonds seemed secondary to the emotion in his eyes. His voice was steady but deeply felt. I met you on the worst day of your life. A faint smile touched his lips, and you became the most extraordinary part of mine. Tears streamed down Ife's face. Jae Min continued, You taught me that strength and tenderness can live in the same heart. That dignity cannot be purchased. And that love is not about possession. It is about choosing one person, clearly and completely. He drew a careful breath. Ife, Anna James. The world seemed to hold still. Will you let me spend the rest of my life choosing you? She laughed through tears, the answer already shining in every part of her. Yes. The word escaped as both a promise and a homecoming. Jae Min slipped the ring onto her finger, then rose and kissed her. not hurriedly, not possessively, but with the full tenderness of a man who had waited until love was ready to be received. Around them, cherry blossoms drifted softly to the ground, and in the quiet garden above Seoul, the woman who had once walked away from her own wedding stepped into a future infinitely greater than the one she thought she had lost. Months later, they were married in a ceremony defined not by spectacle, but by truth. Grace James wept openly. Even Madam Kim, her influence permanently diminished and her perspective chastened, bowed with genuine respect. The vows were simple. The love beneath them was anything but. Because some stories begin with perfect plans, and some begin with a public collapse so devastating that it seems impossible to imagine anything beautiful emerging from the wreckage. But beauty often arrives through interruption, through exposure, through the painful mercy of discovering what was false before it becomes permanent. And so the story of Ify Anna James and Jae-min Kim ended where all great love stories do, not with rescue, not with revenge, but with two people who recognized each other in the ruins and built something stronger than either had dared to hope. Ify had walked into one wedding to lose a false future, and walked out into the love that was waiting for her. The end. If you enjoy this story, please like, share with your friends and loved ones.
기도로 시작된 사랑 Lord lead us under grace In the quiet room I prayed your name You answered me with love Not faith 숨겨진 길에도 주의 손 계시네 Not